So how does dukkha give rise to suffering? That's the second noble truth. We saw that strictly speaking, the structure of reality isn't suffering. It's just such that it will always lead to suffering when combined with another factor. So the second noble truth diagnoses how the disease arises, and it is called samudaya. Samudaya literally means the causing or arising of dukkha. And the main thing that it can be attributed to is when the impermanent and imperfect and conditioned nature of reality meets up with a conscious drive, which is called tanha in Sanskrit. Again, tanha I'm not going to translate because it has a variety of meanings. In physical context, it means literally thirst. And so when you think of yourself as thirsty, then of course you have desire for water. And so often it's translated as desire, but then again, it's a lot more than desire because we don't desire everything. Unlike we see in Schopenhauer, where he talks about everything as striving, the Buddha says, no, a lot of times we are not striving. We are actually going or repelled by many things. And so another way that it's translated is clinging. And clinging is a better translation because there are two ways that we cling to reality. The first way we cling is through desire, through attraction. We meet up with somebody who we're deeply attracted to, or we see a car that we love, that we would love to drive. In each of these cases, it produces a desire or a love for the object. And when you love something, then you not only want to get it, but unlike Schopenhauer, you want to keep it, right? So the idea of love or attraction isn't simply about desiring, it's about when you already have it, how you seek to keep it your own. And therefore, there's the clinging of attraction. But there's also the clinging of aversion. There are many things I meet up with, like pain or disappointment or a terrible movie or ugliness that I want to avoid. And so therefore, not only do I seek to hold on to things, but I also seek to get rid of things. And that too is a type of hate or disgust. It is also tanha, it is also clinging. Now this doesn't seem as intuitive as the other end, does it? Why would that be a clinging? The best way to understand this is through a story that's told of two Buddhist monks that were traveling back home to their monastery. As they were traveling, they had to cross a river. Now you have to understand that in monasteries, especially in Southeast Asia and China, one of the cardinal rules was to not lust or even touch or look at a woman. And so now these two monks, an older master and a younger disciple, were traveling. They come to a river and they're ready to cross the river at the ford because it's pretty shallow. As they're crossing, they see in the middle of the river a young, beautiful woman who is being overpowered by the current and she can't get across the river. So lo and behold, the old master picks up the young lady in all the wrong places and carries her, puts her on his shoulder and carries her across the river and puts her down and then continues walking. Needless to say, the young disciple is completely shocked. How could my master, who has taught me to have purity of heart and to avoid sexual desire and lust, and has always told us never to even look or touch a woman, which will lead away from enlightenment, how could he break the very rule he told us to keep? And so, of course, in ancient China, you don't question your master, you leave it inside. And so they continued walking on. But the master knew there was something wrong, and so as they were resting, he said, "What's going on, my disciple? You look very upset." And the young disciple said, "You always told us to not even touch a woman, to not look at a woman with lust, and yet you broke every rule by picking her up and carrying across the river. Why did you do that? And here was the master's response. He said, I put her down at the river. Why are you still carrying her? See, the point isn't about what you do. It's what you're attached to. What you hate, you attach yourself to. You absolutize them. They become a certain type of person if it's a person you hate. And everything they say or do, you interpret through your hatred. And so what you cling to is not the person. You're trying to avoid them. You cling to your ideas about that person. You cling to your initial impressions of that person. You cling to your hatred. And so therefore, you don't put her down at the river. So clinging can be attraction and disgust. And forgiveness is the opposite. Forgiveness is when I release not only the person who I want to condemn, but by releasing them and untying them, I untie myself and I release myself. And so we see that tanha is both attraction and aversion. The best translation is attachment. In both cases, I'm attached to, either through hate or love, what is causing me suffering. And why does attachment cause suffering? Well, when I'm attached to something, I don't want to lose it, do I? But what will inevitably happen through change? I will lose it. I'm striving for an unchanging possession of what I love, and I must lose it. So I must suffer. Also, what I'm attached to, I absolutize. I make it into something that is more real in my mind than it's real in reality. And so therefore I cling to an illusion which I inevitably must become disillusioned about when life reveals that what my idea about things isn't real at all. And then of course I desire perfection, don't I? I hate this person, I love this, and I'm always striving for the perfect enjoyment of my ideals. And there is no perfect. Everything lacks. Everything is conditioned and limited by everything else. And so therefore it follows that my perfect ideas will always suffer disappointment. Always will never be a full enjoyment, simply because what I strive to enjoy doesn't exist. So we see how it's not reality itself. It's not the changing, imperfect, and empty nature of reality that is suffering. It's when it's combined inevitably with this clinging, this natural attachment to things that we as humans always produce. So how does suffering arise? It arises through an ignorance, doesn't it? Because underlying all of the striving is an ignorance of the changing nature of reality, of the non-absolute nature of things, of the imperfection of things. We desire this unchanging, absolute, perfect God, you might even say, contra Boethius, precisely because we believe it's possible to attain these. And that belief that it is possible, therefore, is what underlies the totality of our suffering, a basic ignorance that requires enlightenment. Now, what is it the ignorance of? Let's put Buddhism back into its context. Remember, the Buddha grew up, Siddhartha Gautama, as a good Hindu. And the basic truth of all branches of Vedanta Hinduism is what is called Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. Every branch believes that you have this eternal ego or self called the Atman. And that what causes the suffering in this world is this mistaking of your limited conditioned self, your embodied self, for the true self. And what you had to come to realize is what Atman, what your true self is. And when you do this, then you achieve absolute union with ultimate reality, with Brahman. And so when you say Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art, it's the realization that you are God, you are ultimate reality, and therefore there is this possibility, this ultimate, unchanging, perfect, and absolute substantial self or reality, which is bliss. So what is the Buddha denying? He's denying that there is such a thing as Atman, that there is a true self. In fact, he's saying it's the belief in a true self that's so natural to us that is the source of all of this attachment and therefore all of this suffering. Once I come to experientially realize the truth of no self, that is when all attachment naturally loses its clinginess, its stickiness. So in our next segment on this, we are going to give the Buddha's proof as to why we can rationally say that the belief that there is a true self, an ego, is false.